How does a 30-year-old Irish bishop, ordained at 25, already confronting clergy who married openly and passed church positions to their sons like family businesses, become Archbishop of Armagh, Ireland's most powerful ecclesiastical position, serve for 5 years, transforming a broken institution, then voluntarily resign to become a simple bishop again because he preferred shepherding souls to managing politics? What kind of reformer travels twice across Europe to Rome seeking papal approval for transforming an entire national church, introducing Roman liturgical practices, enforcing celibacy, ending hereditary church offices, bringing Cistercian monasticism to Irish soil, yet does so with such gentleness that he is remembered not as a harsh disciplinarian, but as a miracle-working mystic who died in the arms of his dearest friend? And why is this 12th century Irish saint, who reformed an entire church, introduced the Cistercians to Ireland, whose biography was written by Saint Bernard himself, who was canonized just 42 years after his death, largely forgotten today, his real story buried beneath legends and false prophecies he never made? This is the hidden story of Saint Malachi, the Irish bishop who reformed a nation's faith, the archbishop who voluntarily surrendered power because pastoral work mattered more than prestige, the friend of Saint Bernard who proved that authentic reform balances tradition and change, that episcopal authority exists for service, not status, and that a saint's true story is always more extraordinary than the legends attached to his name. Ireland, in the late 11th century, was a land where Christianity had flourished for 600 years, yet had grown strange in Rome's eyes. The Celtic Church that St. Patrick had planted had developed its own traditions, its own calendar, its own monastic structures. Beautiful in many ways, problematic in others. Church positions had become family property. Abbots passed their monasteries to their sons. Bishops bequeathed their dioceses like estates. Clergy married openly, and no one questioned it. The sacraments were administered, yes, but according to practices that differed significantly from Rome's universal norms. Ireland was Christian, but it was Christian in its own way, and that way needed reform. Into this world, in the year 1094, a child was born in Armagh, the ecclesiastical heart of Ireland. His name was Mael Maedoc Ua Morgair, later anglicized as Malachy O'More. His family was deeply connected to the church, though in the problematic way of that era. Hereditary ecclesiastical positions, laymen holding abbacies, the sacred mixed uncomfortably with the secular. Yet something in young Malachy burned differently. He studied under Eamar O'Hagan, a scholar of Armagh known for his learning and his reforming spirit. The boy absorbed scripture, theology, and the practices of the universal church. He learned what Ireland had forgotten and what it needed to remember. At 25, in 1119, Malachy was ordained a priest. He could have settled into comfortable ecclesiastical life. Instead, he began immediately to challenge everything comfortable about Irish Christianity. He preached against hereditary church offices. He insisted on clerical celibacy. He introduced Roman liturgical practices. He was young, passionate, and utterly convinced that love for tradition did not mean accepting corruption. The opposition was fierce. Men who had inherited church positions for generations did not appreciate being told their claims were illegitimate. But Malachy pressed on. His reforms were not born of contempt for Celtic Christianity, but of love for its purification. He wanted to preserve what was beautiful while removing what had grown rotten. The fire had been lit, and it would not be extinguished. In 1124, at just 30 years old, Malachy was consecrated Bishop of Conor and Down, a vast territory in northeastern Ireland that had been devastated by Viking raids. Churches lay in ruins. Monasteries stood empty. The faith that remained was scattered, disorganized, clinging to life by threads. Malachy arrived not as a distant administrator, but as a shepherd walking among his sheep. He traveled constantly, visiting villages that had not seen a bishop in years. He preached in fields and rebuilt churches stone by stone. He ordained priests where there had been none, and taught the sacraments where they had been forgotten. But reform was his deeper mission. He confronted clergy who had taken wives and demanded they choose the priesthood or marriage, but not both. He challenged families who had controlled church properties for generations, insisting that sacred offices were not inheritances to be passed down like farmland. He introduced the Roman liturgy, standardizing practices that had drifted into local peculiarity. The resistance was bitter. Some clergy refused to change. Some powerful families threatened him openly. The reforms touched not just religious practice, but economic interests, families losing control of church lands they had held for centuries. Then came the Viking raids. In 1127, Connor was devastated. Churches that Malachy had rebuilt were burned again. His flock scattered. For a time, he retreated with a small community to Iverag in the far southwest, a place of temporary exile where he could regroup and pray. But exile did not break him. It refined him. In the silence of Iveragh, Malachy deepened his prayer, clarified his vision, strengthened his resolve. When the opportunity came to return, he was ready, not just to rebuild Connor, but to take on something far greater. In 1132, Malachy was named Archbishop of Armagh. It was the most powerful ecclesiastical position in Ireland, and it was the most contested. Armagh was Ireland's primatial see, the seat founded by Saint Patrick himself. Whoever held it held spiritual authority over the entire island. And for generations, that authority had been claimed by a single family through hereditary succession passed from uncle to nephew like a crown. When Malachy arrived, the previous claimant's family did not simply yield. They contested his appointment. Some refused to recognize him. Others threatened violence. For 5 years, Malachy navigated this treacherous terrain, reforming where he could, compromising where he must, always pressing toward the vision of a church aligned with Rome's universal norms. He succeeded. By 1137, Armagh had been transformed. Hereditary succession was broken. Clerical discipline was restored. Roman liturgical practices had taken root. The Irish Church, at least in this most important see, was moving toward conformity with the universal church. And then Malachy did something that stunned everyone. He resigned. Voluntarily, without pressure, without scandal. He simply stepped down from the most powerful position in Irish Christianity and returned to being Bishop of Down, a smaller, simpler diocese where he could focus on pastoral work rather than ecclesiastical politics. "I prefer shepherding souls," he explained, "to managing institutions." It was an act almost without precedent. Bishops did not resign. Archbishops certainly did not resign. Power, once gained, was held until death. But Malachy understood something that most churchmen forgot. Authority exists for service, not for status. When the mission is accomplished, the position should be surrendered to someone who can continue the work. He had reformed Armagh. Others could maintain it. His heart called him elsewhere, to simpler ministry, to direct pastoral care, and to a journey that would change Irish Christianity forever. In 1139, Malachy set out for Rome. The journey to Rome was long and dangerous. Across the Irish Sea, through England, across the Channel, through France, over the Alps. Malachy traveled not for pilgrimage alone, but for mission. He sought papal approval for his reforms, official recognition that would strengthen his work against those who still resisted. But the journey's most significant moment came not in Rome, but in Burgundy, at a monastery called Clairvaux. Bernard of Clairvaux was already the most famous monk in Europe, a mystic, a preacher, an advisor to popes and kings, the driving force behind the Cistercian reform that was transforming European monasticism. His abbey at Clairvaux had become a beacon of austere holiness, attracting men from across the continent who sought a stricter, purer monastic life. Malachy stopped there on his way to Rome, and something extraordinary happened. The two men, the Irish reformer and the French mystic, recognized in each other kindred spirits. They spoke of prayer, of reform, of the church's needs. They discovered a friendship that transcended nationality, background, and everything external. Bernard saw in Malachy a bishop of rare holiness. Malachy saw in Bernard the monastic ideal he wanted for Ireland. The visit was meant to be brief. It planted seeds that would grow for years. Malachy continued to Rome, received papal blessing for his reforms, and returned to Ireland with renewed authority. But his mind kept returning to Clairvaux, to its silence, its discipline, its beauty. He wanted that for his homeland. In 1142, with Bernard's support, Malachy founded Mellifont Abbey, the first Cistercian monastery in Ireland. It was revolutionary. Irish monasticism had its own traditions, but Mellifont represented something new. Strict Benedictine observance, architectural beauty, and connection to the Universal Church's newest and most vibrant monastic movement. From Mellifont, Cistercian foundations spread across Ireland. By the time of Malachy's death, the movement had transformed Irish religious life. The Celtic traditions were not destroyed. They were purified, renewed, and brought into communion with the broader church. Bernard and Malachy continued their friendship through letters. They dreamed of Malachy joining the community at Clairvaux permanently. But duty kept him in Ireland. There was still work to do. Until 1148, when Malachy set out for Rome once more. He was 54 years old and weary. Decades of reform, of travel, of confrontation, of pastoral care, they had taken their toll. But there was business in Rome that required his presence, and Malachy was not a man to shirk duty. He stopped at Clairvaux, as he had before. Bernard welcomed him with joy, the reunion of friends who had not seen each other in years, yet had never ceased praying for one another. But Malachy was not well. The journey had exhausted him. A fever took hold. As the days passed, it became clear he would not continue to Rome. Bernard nursed him personally. The greatest monk in Europe tended the Irish bishop like a servant, bringing water, changing linens, and praying at his bedside. Their conversations in those final days were never recorded, but one can imagine them, two old friends speaking of heaven, of the work left undone, of trust in providence. On the 2nd of November 1148, or perhaps November 3, the records vary, Malachy died. Tradition holds that he breathed his last in Bernard's arms. The two friends united in the moment of passage. Bernard wept. He preached at the funeral, his voice breaking with grief. And then he did something that ensured Malachy would never be forgotten. He wrote his biography. The life of Saint Malachi is our primary source for everything we know about the Irish reformer. Bernard wrote with love and admiration, recording miracles he had witnessed, virtues he had observed, a life that he considered genuinely holy. It was both a tribute to a friend and a gift to the church, the portrait of a bishop who embodied what episcopal ministry should be. Malachy was buried at Clairvaux, far from Ireland but among brothers in Christ. Bernard himself, when he died 5 years later, was buried beside him. The two friends who had found each other across nations and languages rest together still. Malachy was canonized in 1190, just 42 years after his death, remarkably swift for that era. His cultus spread through Ireland, and wherever Cistercians had foundations, churches were dedicated to him. Pilgrims sought his intercession. And then something strange happened. Centuries later, a document appeared claiming to be Malachy's prophecies, a list of cryptic phrases supposedly predicting every pope from his time until the end of the world. The prophecy of the popes became famous. People studied it, debated it, and applied it to contemporary events. There was only one problem. Malachy never wrote it. Modern scholarship has conclusively shown that the prophecy of the popes was forged around 1590, more than 400 years after Malachy's death. It was likely created to influence a papal conclave, using predictions that were actually written after the events they described. The real Malachy had nothing to do with it. Yet, the false prophecy became more famous than the true saint. Today, when people hear Saint Malachi, they think of dubious predictions about future popes, rather than the remarkable Irish reformer who transformed his nation's church. This is the tragedy of forgotten saints, that legends obscure reality, that sensational fictions bury genuine holiness. The real Malachy was far more interesting than the forger's invention. He was a bishop who resigned power voluntarily, a reformer who balanced tradition and change, a mystic who was also a practical administrator, a friend who inspired one of history's greatest spiritual writers to craft his biography. His story speaks to our own time, to churches struggling with reform, to leaders tempted by power, to traditions seeking renewal without destruction. Malachy shows it can be done. Celtic and Roman can coexist. Authority can be surrendered when the mission is complete. Friendship across differences can transform everything. What remains of Saint Malachi today? Mellifont Abbey still stands in Ireland, ruins now, but ruins that echo with 6 centuries of prayer that flowed from Malachy's vision. The Cistercian presence he planted transformed Irish spirituality, connecting the island's ancient Christian traditions with the universal church's renewal movements. His reforms endured. The hereditary church offices he fought against disappeared. The clerical discipline he championed became standard. The liturgical alignment he sought was achieved. Ireland remained distinctively Irish in its faith, but no longer isolated, part of the broader Catholic communion. And his friendship with Bernard reminds us that holiness is not solitary. Saints need saints. The Irish bishop and the French mystic found in each other something irreplaceable: understanding, encouragement, and the recognition of kindred souls. Their friendship across cultures and distances models what Christian communion should be. For bishops today, Malachy offers a challenging example. He sought the most powerful position in his church and then resigned it when his work was done. How many leaders have that courage? How many recognize when their season has ended and gracefully step aside? For reformers, he shows that change need not be violent. His reforms were persistent but patient. He did not destroy Celtic traditions. He purified them. He did not impose Rome by force. He persuaded by example. The gentle reformer accomplished more than harsh revolutionaries ever could. For all who struggle with false legends obscuring true faith, Malachy's story is a call to recover reality. The prophecy of the popes is a forgery. The real saint is far more compelling. Sometimes the most faithful thing we can do is strip away the sensational and return to the true. An Irish bishop who walked among ruins and rebuilt. An archbishop who surrendered power because pastoral care mattered more. A friend who died in a friend's arms, far from home but among brothers. Saint Malachi of Armagh, also known as Saint Malachi in traditional Hebrew, was not the false prophet of invented prophecies, but the true reformer who changed a nation's faith. The hidden story. The real saint. His feast comes each November, a reminder that genuine holiness needs no embellishment, that true prophecy is a life lived in fidelity, and that the greatest legacy is not predictions about the future, but faithfulness in the present. Malachy showed what faithfulness looks like, and that is prophecy enough.